Welcome everyone. I'm Farrell Hoy-Janab. I'm the Director of Faculty Development at Johnson County Community College, and here we have this great program called College Scholars, originator of which Dr. Jim Liker, who's here tonight, he got it started. What year was that, Jim?
Long time.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity for us to showcase what our faculty do. We already know they are amazing teachers doing amazing things in the classroom, but of course their scholarship continues and they are doing continuing and growing in that way. And so I'm going to ask Mark Cowarden to come up tonight and introduce tonight's scholar, Tonia Hughes.
Thank you. So it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. And my name is Mark Cowarden, in case you don't know. I'm the chair of the Fine Arts Photo and Film Department. And I'm going to read Tonia's introduction here so I don't miss anything because it's important, right? Tonia Hughes is a sociopolitically driven visual artist working in the influential mediums of photography, video, and installation. While the majority of her work is rooted in political, feminist, and queer theory discourse, it also continues to express a broad range of topical and academic research. In addition to her creations in visual arts, Hughes continues her research in women's, gender, and sexuality studies and completed a graduate certificate from the field from Georgia State University in 2016. This research serves as a foundation for the visual art she typically creates. Hughes has presented for public discussion, panels, and academic conferences on topics relating to the queer community and human rights, and has shown her work entitled Homogenized at women's sexuality and gender studies conferences. Hughes was born in Raleigh, North Carolina. I didn't know that. North Carolina. And she grew up in the southeastern region of the United States and graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Science degree from Columbus State University in 2004. In 2008, she completed her MFA in photography and video at Georgia State University, and she has taught photography, digital arts, and women's gender and sexuality studies as a senior lecturer at Georgia Southwestern State University from 2009 to 2016. In 2016, we were lucky enough to hire Tonia to come here full-time and teach with us. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome Tonia Hughes. And she's spectacular and fantastic. And what else?
Wonderful.
And wonderful.
In every way.
In
Don't
every
forget
way.
in every way. So can everybody hear me? Mic's working? Okay. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. Thank you to JCCC and the committee for this honor. I really am truly honored to be one of the scholars. And thank you to all of you for showing up on election night and in the rain. And I hope you all voted. So happy voting, right? Yeehaw. Okay, so to get started, there are two things that are kind of important to keep in mind about me as we're moving through this. And the first is that I am an artist, but I'm not the kind of artist that makes things for aesthetic purposes or for beauty. Instead, I tend to make things that speak topically, that are more about concept and ideas and things going on in the world. So Walter Benjamin, depending on your pronunciation, wrote an article entitled Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And in this article, it was written in 1936, and what he discussed was how art changed. Once you started being able to easily reproduce things, it lost something that he referred to as aura. Okay, so before that, he thought that art was about aesthetics, it was about ritual, it was about an artist physically like creating something. But once you start having things like printmaking and photography and filmmaking, where's the original, right? So he started questioning these kind of things. And what he kind of comes to in his article is he says that art then becomes about reaching the masses. No longer about gallery or inviting people in, but about reaching the masses. And inevitably, he says, it's about politics. So my practice is very much rooted in those kind of ideas about art and art making. Another thing that really influences my work is queer theory. So I'm going to just play you an example of a piece that I did that is intended to exemplify queer theory. So queer theory is a philosophical topic where you're kind of looking for where boundaries or binaries get blurred. The easiest way to think about this is baby's born, doctor goes, yay, congratulations, it's a girl, or yay, congratulations, it's a boy. And seemingly, this is like easily identifiable and factual, right? But what we know is that it's not always so, okay? We know that there are times when there are babies born with both genitalia, there are hermaphrodites, there are people with XXY chromosomal patterns. There's also something called androgen insensitivity syndrome, where someone chromosomally is born XY, male, but they phenotypically present as female. Doctor doesn't know, right? It's much later that that gets diagnosed. So for me, I'm very much interested in these places of where things get blurred, where you don't have an either or. And one of the reasons why is that I think the more we can blur the binaries and the more we can kind of remove labels, the more egalitarian our whole world gets. And I think that's really important. I'm going to kind of exit out of this. A lot of my videos tonight are just going to be teasers. And then yet another thing that influences my work is that I truly believe the most ethical way to make work as an artist is to make work about things you're personally vested in. The old adage of like writers needing to write what they know, right? Also, it factors into this second wave feminist philosophy of the personal being political. So when I'm making work, I'm purposely looking for, starting with personal experiences, but looking for where they intersect with something that's happening politically or socially or psychologically, something more on a global scale. So what you're seeing here is an example of an installation I did many, many, many moons ago. But it demonstrates how I work, and it also is topical tonight. So this installation, you walked in and the viewer was first presented with a dual channel projected video of these women. And they just kind of walk in front of you, they stand, they present themselves, they turn, they exit. Sometimes they're coupled like this, sometimes they're single. But it's meant to be this subtle, or was meant to be, this subtle wink at gay marriage movement, which was just getting some ground at the time. In addition to that, there's sound going on in the room. And what the viewer's hearing is a story being told. It's an old folk tale of the little boy who put his finger in the dike in order to prevent a town from being flooded. Only I omitted the word dike, and I changed all the female characters to male characters so that the hero of the story becomes a woman, or a little girl, actually, who puts her finger in the dike. And the reason why I omit the word dike is because I wanted to bring attention to what was shown in the floor. So as you can see, there's a line that goes across the gallery, and it's a line of salt. It's about yay wide, about this deep, and carved out of it are the homophones dike and dike, right? D-I-K-E being the protective barrier that prevents a town from being flooded, a dam, okay? Or D-Y-K-E, which is a derogatory term for a lesbian. So the viewer is offered a choice, okay? They can stand and they can oppose these women that are outing themselves as a part of the queer community, and what they see in the salt is dike, D-Y-K-E. Or they can make the choice to step across the salt, across the line. They can turn and they can join these women as an ally. They can help stand up for them, help protect them, be a part of that community. And then what they read in the salt is D-I-K-E. They become part of that protective barrier. So again, the personal is political, right? So when I created this piece, I was exploring my own sexuality. I was like falling in love for the first time with a woman. And so, which brings me to the second thing you should know about me. I am, I'll admit it, an absolute, total romantic sap. It's just who I am. I cry at movies. I love romantic comedies. Yes, I know, it's a guilty pleasure. Some of my favorites, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, fabulous, hilarious, terrific movie. Okay, yeah, I even liked Mamma Mia. I sing to it, I dance to it, I won't do it for you, it'd be painful. One of my very favorite all-time movies is 4 Weddings and a Funeral, weirdly enough, highly influential in my work. Great. I cried in all of them. And you know, even though I am truly not a fan of sparkly vampires, that wedding though, I mean, it was gorgeous, wasn't it? I mean, you have to just love that. Okay, so I love weddings so much. Okay, this is how much I love weddings. I have personally been married 4 times. Okay, but seriously, what a lot of people don't know about a lot of gay couples of my generation is that we started in, on about a decade battling for marriage equality. So myself, Lisa and I, and also a lot of our friends that were same-sex couples, we witnessed them going through all kinds of different weddings to some extent as an act of political protest, in addition to kind of dedicating ourselves to each other. And with each one of them, there was an increase in legality, okay? Legality and societal acceptance. So this was our first wedding in our backyard, August 1st, 2009. It was a commitment ceremony. Lisa is of Irish descent, I'm of Scottish descent, so we decided to do a Celtic ceremony. Our priestess sanctified it. It was a religious ceremony, but not at all legal, okay? Part of a Celtic hand fasting is that in that tradition, that religion, if you will, you repeat the service a year and a day later, but you do it kind of in private. Kind of a long story about that, but we chose to do this. So this is our second wedding where we were doing our year and a day. Then my work at the time was getting a little recognition. It was really exciting, and I happened to sell a site-specific installation piece, and it was very exciting because it meant we had a little extra money. So we decided, hey, let's spring for putting a legal ring on it, right? So we were living in Georgia at the time, and we drove all the way. Yes, we drove so we could take our kid because we didn't have that much extra money. So we drove all the way to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is a picture from our legal wedding ceremony, okay? But keep in mind, at this time, it's legal federally, it's legal in Massachusetts, but it's not legal in Georgia where we live, that'll bring us back to that tax return part. We'll get there in a minute. Okay. Then in June 2015, the Supreme Court said, this is silly, we're putting an end to it. Gay marriage is legally recognized nationwide. Yay! So, because Lisa and I had been so actively involved in the activist role fighting for this for so long, we were invited to participate in 101 gay weddings. Big, huge event. I wonder if I can get this to pull up. Big, huge event. We were on the cover of People magazine. I'm signing autographs after. It was an exciting time. It was this huge celebration. Okay, it was really great fun. So that was our 4th wedding. Only we really were renewing our vows. But at any rate, then came the tax returns. Okay, so we had about a year and a half-ish or so where we were legally recognized as being married federally, but not in the state. So we had to do 5 tax returns. The federal government said you have to file married because you're married, so we filed that. The state of Georgia said, oh no, you can't file married because you're not married. But they pulled their data from the federal, so we had to file 2 federal tax returns that also said we were single, so that the state could then pull that data, and we had to file 2 state ones that said we were single, because they said you're not married even though we were married. Okay, which brings me to how complicated things get, right? So remember when I said I'm a romantic sap? Okay, don't forget that when I say what I'm about to say, okay? Marriage has very little to do with romance and love and all that stuff. In fact, it has nothing to do with religion either. Well, not nothing, but it has little to do with religion too. If it was about love and commitment and religion and all that stuff, Lisa and I would have been married way back in 2009. We had a priestess that sanctified to you're married, right? But we weren't. So Marriage then becomes about rights, about privileges, about laws, about things like tax returns. So just to talk through some of the privileges and rights. So tax returns, again, you only have to file one. That's a big, trust me, that's a big benefit. Estate planning. So if your spouse dies, you don't really have to have a whole lot of paperwork, and you don't have to pay estate taxes automatically, like it passes to you. Government benefits, things like receiving Social Security, Medicare, disability benefits for your spouse if need be. Employment benefits. This is a big one. During that, again, that period of around 2013-14, I was offered a job in Kentucky, and during the part where I was trying to figure out whether or not to take it, I had called and asked HR, hey, how do you deal with same-sex couples? You know, how is this in Kentucky? And they said, oh, well, we don't acknowledge same-sex couples, but we do domestic partner benefits. I'm like, hey, I don't care what you call this, that sounds good. But then I started researching it. Domestic partner benefits are not the same as marriage benefits. They're really quite different. With marriage benefits, the amount of money that you spend on your medical benefits, for example, it's taken out before taxes, so it's not, or after taxes, so it's not part of your taxable income. Okay, so you save a little bit that way. The other thing is with marital benefits, the university is picking up, or the college picks up some of that tab. It saves people a lot of money. Domestic partnerships, you're doing it after tax or before. I get it mixed up. It's not it becomes taxable income first, and then in addition to that, the university wasn't picking up part of that tab like it is with married couples. Not the same. Really, all they were doing was going, oh, you can buy insurance from us, okay? So employment benefits. Medical benefits, something as simple as being able to see your spouse in intensive care. You have to be married. Being able to find out the status of what's happening to them in the event that there's an emergency. If you're not married, a lot of hospitals won't tell you, or they give you grief about it. Death benefits, consenting to after-death examinations or not, being in charge of all those like final arrangements if your spouse should die. That's out if you're not married. Family benefits. Okay, if you're not married, you also can't get divorced. This becomes kind of problematic. It means there's no entitlement to, say, custody, visitation rights. Not all that stuff is as guaranteed. It becomes really complicated. And then simply things like consumer benefits. How many of us are enrolled in, I don't know, like a family share cell phone plan? That's why I was fighting for gay marriage. It was really about the practicality. We already were committed. We already loved each other. We already had religious, sanctification of our union. So we didn't need all of that. It was about rights, equality, all those kinds of things. So, yay! Now we can be legally married. But then I started seeing something kind of interesting, and I started questioning, but have we queered marriage? Have we fundamentally changed it in any way? Okay? And by queering, I mean, think back queer theory, right? Have we blurred any binaries? Have we changed it? Have we altered it? So I'll tell you what I saw. So again, let me kind of also say some of this is a generational thing, I think. Like again, the people of my generation, we were part of that fight. We went through all kinds of crazy, weird rituals. We really were sort of changing things up, and I don't know, because we kind of had to, right? Newer, younger generation of gay couples, so they're not having to do this. We kind of had to. The necessity being the mother of invention and all that. So the 20, 30-something-year-olds that have been together and are now deciding to get married, they're taking a more traditional approach. So we have some friends of ours, and they're in late 20s, early 30s, and they decided to get married. Wonderful lesbian couple. And we get the little beautiful invitation in the mail, and I'm like, oh, Lisa, look, they're getting married. Look, I'm so excited. So we went to the wedding. It was in this beautiful vineyard in Georgia. Georgia, by the way, has bad wine. Don't try it. But it was a beautiful vineyard, lovely, perfect ceremony. So we go in, and first we're presented with the aisle, right? We know the aisle. Somebody stops and says, "Are you here for the bride or the groom?" Which seems a little odd, the bride or the bride. But anyway, so we go and we take our seat, right? And I'm like already crying because the romantic's out. So then the music gets cued, and the minister comes in, and he walks down, and he takes a stand at the head of the aisle. And then next come the procession of the bridesmaids and the groomsmen. And the bridesmaids were wearing like this lovely lavender dress, and the groomsmen were wearing this kind of trendy, like khaki pants and lavender shirt and funky bow tie, right? And they come and they take their position. And then next came the first bride. Now let me clarify, these are cisgendered women. They're cis women, they're not trans. But she enters, and she's being escorted by her father, and she's wearing an outfit that looks almost exactly like the groomsmen, like trendy little vest. And they get to the end of the aisle, and the dad kisses her on the cheek and then takes his position by her mom. And then there are these two absolutely adorable flower girls that come next. So the first is walking down, and she's sprinkling little sprigs of lavender. And then comes the second, and she's holding a sign that says, "Here comes the bride." So, interesting, the music is cued, and it's that "Here Comes the Bride" tune, the very traditional, I don't remember the actual name of it, but you know what I mean. Dum, dum, da, dum. Okay, so here comes that, and then everybody stands. And we didn't stand for the first bride, but now we're standing, and I'm being a sheep, so I'm standing. Going, what? And then the next bride comes, and she's wearing a beautiful long dress, very traditional, a veil. She's being escorted by her father, and she comes down, and at the end of the aisle, her dad lifts the veil, kisses her, and then puts her hand in the other bride's hand and sits down. Then after, we even learned in the reception that the bride that was wearing the traditional with the veil, right, is changing her last name, and she's taking the last name of the other bride. My feminist heckles are like all up. I'm like, what is happening, right? Okay, we weren't queering anything. So I would argue that instead it seemed like we are being folded into heteronormative culture, including the stuff that's rooted in patriarchal control of the subordination of women. Like we were just being folded into all of that stuff. And so I got kind of worried. All right, so now let's kind of shift and talk a little bit about the history of marriage. Okay, let me start by saying I am not an art historian. I'm glad that some art historians aren't here. I'm not an art historian, but this is an uber famous painting. Anybody who's ever taken even an intro level of like art survey course, they tend to get shown this in order to look at the symbology in art, okay, the symbolism in art. We're taught to kind of dissect it, and I'm going to tell you the dissection I learned, but also I want to kind of caveat and say there are multiple interpretations of this, not art historian. I picked this painting because I think it's interesting thinking about the topic tonight because it also winks at the history of marriage, okay? So this painting was done in 1434, and I'm going to kind of take you through it the way I was taught. Again, though, there's multiple interpretations. So what we see here is this man who has his hand up doing this gesture that we assume is him taking an oath, right? And then down here at the bottom, you can see that their shoes are off. So shoes being off kind of indicating that they're on holy ground, that there's some sort of religious ceremony going on. In the foreground here, you see a dog. Dog often being a symbol of fidelity or loyalty. And then the chandelier that's kind of above them, in between them, is a little odd because there's only one candle in it. So that sort of being a symbol of this event being overlooked by God or Christ. So again, thinking about it being some sort of religious ceremony. And then we have the bed. And the bed being a symbol of, well, you know, right? Okay, so we kind of deduce that this is a wedding. This is a marriage, okay? So in the 1500s, everybody just kind of took the couple's word for it that they exchanged vows. The church didn't get involved. The state and the government, they pretty much stayed out of it. Mostly it was about a familial alliance, okay? Two families going, hey, it'd be advantageous for us to join. In this situation, there is a lot said about the fact that he's taking an oath, but he is holding her hand with his left hand. It's considered a left-handed marriage, which would indicate that she is of a lesser status in society than he is. So she's like a commoner, okay? So typically there's no contract, there's nothing other than the couple saying, yeah, we're married now. More often than not, it was about legitimizing children. It was a way of him kind of saying, the kid's mine, okay? In this situation, the suggestion that was proposed to me when I was studying art history is that because of her lower social status is perhaps why this painting was created. She wanted something a little bit more reassuring than just his word, right? That he was going to stick with this, that they were actually going to be married, okay? So the key, though, is she's not having to take an oath, right? Her hand's not up. Because during this day, marriage in general, women are seen as property. It's about the passing of ownership of father of this woman to husband, and about the ownership of those children, or that offspring. So, to exemplify this a little bit more, Angela Davis wrote in Are Prisons Obsolete? She was looking at why do we not see more female prisons, women prisons in history. But she said, since women were largely denied public status as rights-bearing individuals, they could not be easily punished by the deprivation of such rights through imprisonment. This was especially true of married women who had no standing before the law. According to English common law, marriage resulted in a state of civil death, as symbolized by the wife's assumption of the husband's name. So, to kind of continue, marriage licenses didn't really become much of a thing until the 19th century. Love didn't really become a serious consideration until about 250 years ago. And that was when our economy sort of shifted from being about agriculture, kind of needing all those children and everybody to farm or whatever, about agriculture to shifting to a market economy. So arguably there was a little bit more leisure time. People started going, hey, maybe marriage needs to be more than just about familial alliances. Maybe instead we need to love each other or be sexually attracted to each other. But that was only about 250 years ago. Only about 50 years ago in the 70s, did women start gaining any kind of rights within a marriage, okay? So like before 50 years ago, a man could never be charged criminally for raping his wife. It couldn't happen, right? Because her body really belonged to him. Only 50 years ago. That's sort of astounding to think about. And arguably, that also with the feminist movement, the second wave feminist movement in particular, women started working outside the home, they started gaining a little more independence, roles started changing, marriage started becoming more egalitarian, okay? And with that change, it sort of paved the way for bringing in same-sex marriage. Because now all of a sudden it really was starting to be about who do you want to be partnered with, less and less about gender roles, less and less about some societal contract where the guy has to support the family and the woman's going to handle all the domestic kind of things and raise kids. Like it's less and less that way. So then why not have same-sex marriage if we don't have gendered roles? But even with all that, I just watched recently, we're still seemingly adhering to these wedding rituals that exemplify power dynamic. So let's think a little bit more about these wedding rituals. So let's just kind of go through it. Guy's been dating somebody for a really long time. He's in love. He's starry-eyed. So what does he do? He's ready to get married. So the first thing is, in proper society, right, is he goes to the father and he asks for her hand in marriage, right? He says, Dad, will you give me permission to marry your lovely daughter, right? So again, this reminder, this thinking, even in contemporary day, that she belongs first to father, and then with his permission, get passed to being owned by husband, right, by man. So then, okay, so dad says, you know, I like you, and you can marry my daughter because I think you'd be a great son-in-law. Okay, so then what's the next thing? So the next thing, he's going to propose. So he organizes the big flash mob, goes over the top, he's hired actors, he's got a gorgeous ring, does the whole thing, gets down on one knee at the perfect moment he proposes, and he puts a ring on it, right? But he's not wearing a ring, she's wearing a ring, right? Again, so it's this idea that he's showing she's taken, right? She is now betrothed to him. Still this looking, even in contemporary day, at this transfer of ownership. So what's next? Then you've got the wedding. Okay, so just thinking about the wedding. So you have the aisle, again, kind of showing these familial separations between his and her, thinking about the alliance. The veil. Historically, the veil was more often used in situations of arranged marriages. All right, maybe the groom has never even seen the bride, and they want to keep her face covered until he's committed, just in case she's not pretty. It keeps him from going running, right? The train on a gown and the veil also both being symbolic of her purity, her virginity. And interestingly enough, imagining and thinking that symbolically the father is the protector of her sexuality, of her virginity. He still owns her sexuality even until she's given to her husband. That whole lifting of the veil at the aisles, father again, like saying, okay, you know, I'm condoning this. Giving the bride away by the father, a very physical representation of that transfer of ownership. The bride taking her husband's name, legal representation of her loss of identity, like her changing out her last name for his. Although arguably, is it really? Because she really had her father's last name, right? But anyway, so the change of title. All of a sudden, you know, with little girls, they're called Miss. Then they get to be grown, they're called Ms. And then you get married and you're Mrs., right? Men don't do that. They go, I think younger boys are called Master, and then they go to Mr., but then there's no change. Somehow it is significant enough that we start changing women's name, title as well. And then the carrying of flowers is another like wedding ritual. So usually it's the women, right, who carry flowers. Guys just have a sprig from the bouquets. But the flowers being symbolic of a woman's fertility, really seeing her as this vessel, this being that is supposed to have babies, right? So in watching my friends, right, what I became concerned about is that if we're still in these rituals holding on to these things that are so rooted in patriarchal control and in demonstrating women as this subordinate thing, well then, did our fight for marriage equality really help the queer community? Did it possibly hurt us? So then I started thinking about normalcy. Just what is normalcy? Why is it that we're even in this position of questioning all of these things? So Leonard Davis wrote an article, Rules of Normalcy, Politics, and Disability in the United States. And in it, he explains, before the early to mid-19th century, Western society lacked a concept of normalcy. Indeed, the word normal only appeared in English about 150 years ago. Before the rise of the concept of normalcy, there appears not to have been the concept of the normal, but instead the paradigm was revolving around the word ideal. The key point is that in a culture of the ideal, physical imperfections are not seen as absolute, but as part of a descending continuum from top to bottom. No one, for example, can have an ideal body, and therefore, no one has to have an ideal body. So he goes on to explain that the ideal, what we call normal, developed with the science of statistics and the invention of the bell curve. So the bell curve then is identifying what's normal, so by default also says what's abnormal. Okay, so we started all thinking we needed to be within the normal. So he continues, thus there is an imperative on people to conform, to fit in under the rule of normalcy. So we all wanted to be here. Okay, whereas when it was all about the ideal, you couldn't reach it, so nobody had to try, right? So from this aspect, you can kind of empathize with where the queer community, where gay couples are, right? They want to be in the normal. So in an effort to kind of gain acceptability and validity for their union, they started adopting these hegemonic, heteronormative rituals without kind of questioning. Which brings me to Foucault. So Foucault identified 3 specific types of abnormals. He wrote in Ethics, Subjectivity, and Truth, in the chapter entitled The Abnormals, he identified 3. There was the human monster, the individual to be corrected, and the onanist. Okay, the human monster for Foucault is an individual that combines the impossible and the forbidden. Okay, this is someone who cannot be fixed. Okay, they can't be fixed. So think like we talked about hermaphrodites. Okay, something that is different and cannot be fixed. The individual to be corrected is described as someone that can be corrected through discipline and punishment and can be folded into society, at least on some kind of superficial way, okay? The onanist is somebody who masturbates. I know, it seems odd in the placement, but it is, and it's rooted in the 18th century kind of influence that's put on bodies, and specifically looking at their decision, their thinking that sex was only for reproductive purposes. So it kind of doesn't fall within this topic, so we're not going to talk about that anymore. But the other 2 really are important. Okay, so having said all that, which kind of abnormals are gays? Okay, we're all in agreement we're abnormal. But which kind of abnormal are we? Okay, which are we? If we are, in the words of Lady Gaga, if we're born this way, right, then maybe we're monsters. Maybe we can't be corrected. Okay? All right. If it's a choice, okay, if it's a choice of lifestyle, or if we are born this way, but somehow we can also be folded into normalcy, folded into acceptable culture, acceptable society, well, then we're citizens needing to be corrected, okay, through punishment. Assuming that we're citizens needing to be corrected, okay, then there's also 2 different ways to look at the folding in of queer marriage into heteronormative society. The first is that it could be seen, the resignifying of these rituals could be seen as empowering. Okay, it could be like they're owning something that's previously been denied. And that is kind of an interesting way of looking at this, that it's sort of like a matter of defiance, okay? The second approach, though, is to kind of think, but maybe it's not necessary to conform, right? Maybe it's just not needed. But instead, we're just being corrected this way. We're being told that we need to be able to do this. Let me also kind of mention, because I think it begs mentioning, that I've been doing a whole lot of talking about the queer community and about queer marriage and same-sex marriage, but you don't see all this as readily with gay men, okay? Arguably, I think that gay guys kind of have one up on us on this way. And then possibly, I think it's because as men, they already have a certain amount of privilege because they're men in a patriarchal culture, so they have a little bit more freedom, okay? You don't see as much of them like wearing veils and doing that whole thing, okay? But then Foucault goes on to also mention in Subjectivity and Truth, Sex, Power, and the Politics of Identity, this was from an interview about his book, that being abnormal in the sense of being gay offers an opportunity to create a new culture, and to do so in part due to its defiance of heterosexual norm. So looking again, thinking maybe we should be defying it instead of reaching for acceptability. So in his words, he says, what I meant was that I think what the gay movement needs now is much more of the art of life than a science or scientific knowledge or pseudoscientific knowledge of what sexuality is. Sexuality is part of our behavior. It's part of our world freedom. Sexuality is something that we ourselves create. It's our own creation and much more than a discovery of some secret side of desire. We have to understand with our desires, through our desires, and go new forms of relationships, new forms of love, new forms of creation. Sex is not a fatality. It's a possibility of creative life. I absolutely love that definition of sexuality. That's a possibility of a creative life. So my concern is that we, the queer community, in our attempt to gain acceptability and conformability, that somehow we're sacrificing the opportunity to create something totally new, and not just for the queer community, but for society as a whole, just like a rethinking of it all. What are we doing? Don't let me get ahead of myself. Okay, so Foucault continues, it's important first to have the possibility and the right to choose your own sexuality. And this gets to where he's talking about identity in just a minute. Human rights regarding sexuality are important and are still not respected in many places. We shouldn't consider that such problems are solved now. And I think this is especially true kind of post-marriage equality. Like, we need to realize we don't need to stop. The process was good, but we have to go a step further. And in this, I completely agree with Foucault. He says, I think that one of the factors of destabilization will be the creation of new forms of life, relationships, friendships in society, art, culture, and so on, through our sexual, ethical, and political choices. Not only do we have to defend ourselves, not only affirm ourselves as an identity, but as a creative force. So again, Foucault is really stressing that we need to think about how we can redefine our culture. We need to be creative. And we need to, the queer community needs to become a creative force. So his suggestion is to go beyond where we are now and don't stop. Bringing me to a broader look at identities and how identities work. So in thinking about all of this and in looking at the way people are othered and corrected and encouraged to conform, right? I started thinking about identities in general. And I started working and creating these portraits entitled Homogenized. And it was influenced by two very important articles that I studied. One of them was an article written by Richard Dyer entitled The Matter of Whiteness. And so Dyer says, as long as race is something only applied to non-white peoples, as long as white people are not racially seen and named, we, functions as a human norm. Other people are raced. We're just people. There is no more powerful position than that of being just human. So to give you an example of kind of what he's talking about, you read in a headline something like, cop shoots black man, right? So the black man being raced, the cop assumably is white. We don't race him. That's a position of power, is where he's getting at. Then to exemplify how all marginalized people become othered in a similar kind of way, there's an article entitled White Normality or Racism Against the Abnormal by Al-Saji, and she writes, racism affects almost every aspect of our contemporary lives, managing our relations to our own bodies as well as to those of others, and indeed molding those bodies themselves. The oppression not only of non-white races, but also of whites who have been judged to be abnormal. I would say that these elements of identity operate to racialize the subjects to whom they're attributed. By being more or less normalized or construed as abnormal, they position subjects differentially with respect to whiteness, as either included or excluded to white normality. So I started photographing these individuals from a plethora of different marginalized communities in an attempt to express the way that all marginalized people become othered, as well as to express the attempts of society to correct, to discipline and punish, like Foucault talked about, these othered people. It works like through all kinds of different ways, like simply the denying that privilege exists is a way that this happens. Erasing identities, right, trying to get people to conform to Western types of behavior, of dress, of style, of religion. All of these things, even down to, arguably, the folding in of our rituals and weddings, right, and the queer community into those types of practices. So the individuals in these photographs are being smothered in this white, and I'm also going to show you a video. Again, this is a teaser. I just finished the video, but to save time, I'm going to mute it, but the sound's really important. But I'll start playing it so you can see.
Homogenized.
Sorry.
White.
Teaser.
Non-white.
Okay. So you would just sort of watch. So this white becoming a metaphor for this oppression, for this way that we kind of fold people in or demand that they become like the white community. So with the newness of same-sex marriage, you kind of understand where they're coming from, right? Like, we want to be accepted. We want validity for our relationships. And that's where they were coming from in their adapting of all of these rituals. But then, and it also becomes a matter of convention. So to give you a personal example, Lisa and I, after we got married, a lot of people are like, well, what do you call each other, right? How do you introduce each other? So for me as a feminist, like, wife becomes this ugly four-letter word that's associated with slavery and ownership, and I don't want to own her and she doesn't own me, so I don't want to be called that. So partner gets confused and thought to be like, is it a business partnership? Is it a studio partner? What do you mean by partner, right? Lover, well, it's a little bit too much information, right? Nobody wants to be called that. So we ended up settling with spouse, but then that feels a little weird and awkward and formal sometimes too. So there also becomes, like, the gay marriage right now is so incredibly new that even a lot of forms haven't caught up. Just like, what, a year, 2 years ago, we were filling out financial aid forms for our son, and there's mother income, father income, right? And true story, when our son was in high school, I had registered him and filled out all the paperwork, and it just gave mother, father, although it did say /stepmother /stepfather. So I just marked it out where it said father, stepfather, and wrote co-parent. That makes sense, right? Well, then one day Lisa went up to pick Hughes from our son up from high school, take him to the doctor visit, something like that. And the receptionist refused to let her have him. And we're like, but she's on the records. Well, she said that she didn't understand what co-parent meant. Okay, so true story. Like, it becomes complicated, and sometimes truly it's just a matter of convention. So I'm going to close this out. Again, teasers tonight. And you can see a few more from the Homogenized series. So getting back to their wedding, they were doing what they thought they could in order to help a mostly straight audience, a mostly straight guest list that had never even been to a same-sex marriage wedding ceremony, like, make everybody feel better. And it makes sense. It makes sense. But I would argue that much like what Foucault was suggesting, we need to be more creative. And we're missing out possibly on an opportunity to change culture, to change society. And as he would argue, the queer community becoming a creative force, something that can motivate that change systemically all throughout our culture. Having said all that, though, I do want to end on a positive note. I'm seeing a whole lot of encouragement from the next generation. Okay? The students in my classroom, I love that they're coming in and asking to be called, asking to use non-binary pronouns, for example. I think that's fabulous. Any of that blurring of boundaries, right? The dissolving of labeling in general. And even like thinking about this talk, I stumbled upon a really cute BuzzFeed article where they were listing out 11 ideas of getting married without traditional roles. And they had ideas like getting rid of the gender roles entirely and not having like groomsmen and bridesmaids, but just having friends. What a novel idea. Like, they were suggesting things like, you know, maybe the groom can carry flowers, right? And just think of it as being something celebratory. Getting rid of the aisle altogether. Not having a formal proposal, like stuff like that. And so I really thought it was kind of great. And all in all, what I'm proposing is that we rethink marriage as an institution, right down to these wedding rituals. And that even kind of in a broader idea, we rethink identity. We rethink labeling. We rethink all of these things that keep us all separated, right? And instead we start thinking about people as just being individuals and identifying as themselves. So I hope that was a good talk for you guys. These are the citations. If you're interested, there's a bunch of them.
Does anybody have any questions? Comments?
Yes.
So the roles that each of the people took in the wedding that you were at, did that carry over to their everyday life, you think? Or was it more role playing?
You know what's interesting to me is that I think that they had a very egalitarian relationship, and it still is today. It didn't. It really was more role playing.
Did everybody hear the question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, good question. But I really don't think so. I think it was a matter of convention to a large extent.
I'm kind of following up on the last question. I wonder if you think that it was the wedding that you went to where the two women were fulfilling these very male, female gender roles, if it was maybe partly for the people in attendance to make them more comfortable. I think of, for example, my own family who might be much more comfortable with a wedding that could have been made as traditional as possible. And then it seems more like, I don't know, like a form of politeness, which I'll acknowledge isn't always good, right? We do some terrible things and hide them behind manners. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, first of all, I'm speculating, okay? This isn't a conversation I ever really had with them. It felt a little rude, which is why I don't have pictures of their wedding or name them. Although I probably could have conversations. Anyway, I'm speculating. I think you're absolutely right. Any of us who've had weddings, especially big weddings, they get out of hand because everybody and your third cousin get involved. You know, and it often does. So many of those decisions become less about the couple and more about politeness. So I definitely think that's true. I also think that as a culture, we so often just assume that rituals are okay because it's the way it's always been done, and we don't really often stop and think about what is it we're doing and what does it mean. And so I don't know that they really had, I don't know that there was much questioning of it either. I think that it was, here's what's accepted, what's supposed to happen in a wedding, how do we make it fit for a gay couple? And I think that's as far as the thinking went, right? We assume an aisle, we assume flowers, we assume a veil, and no one, heterosexual couple or homosexual couple, I don't think people think a whole lot beyond that. We go to a wedding, we expect certain things. But yeah, I think it was about that. I don't think there was anything malicious at all in it.
So what do you say to the proposition that people need traditions? That when you try to introduce too much change into society too quickly, you'll face a backlash that can be dangerous for the very people that the change is supposed to be helping.
You want to know what I say about that? Me personally, okay, I'm not a sociologist, okay? I would argue that yes, there's going to be backlash, you're absolutely right, but the fear of backlash is not a reason to prevent change. And that when change is needed, period. And if we suffer backlash, well, we'll fight the backlash.
Tonia, I'd love to hear more about your wedding. You know, how
Ours?
Yes, and the degree to which you were thinking of these thoughts as you went through those 4 weddings.
Oh,
and
that's
how
a good. So you know, romantic sap. Okay, I mean, I could talk for like hours. No, actually, Lisa and I both studied women, gender, and sexuality. Okay, her graduate degree is in that subject, and her undergraduate was sociology. This is dinner time conversation for us. We're a little different than that. So our weddings were really purposefully defying all of that. We had a woman that was a priestess. She was pagan, Wiccan priestess. She would identify as pagan, not Wiccan. It was a Celtic ceremony. You noticed in the picture there was a circle. So there's no division at all. you enter and you walk 3 times clockwise to, it's about Wiccan stuff, so you cast a spell. Our hand fasting, our vows, this seems less than romantic, but we both found it quite romantic. Our vows were not your traditional to having to hold for better or worse, for rich or poor, any of that. We're like, screw that. So our vows were, again, rooted in the Celtic tradition, or the pagan tradition, really, not Celtic, but the pagan tradition of them being real. They were stuff like, do you promise to make her angry? Yeah, I can make her angry, right? And then the second follow-up was, will that be your intent? Well, no. So it was very much rooted in things that truly happen every day, not like forever and always. In fact, you end the ceremony with, you promise to do all these things as long as love lasts. It sounds less than romantic, but we thought, no, that's how it is, right? You get up every day and you decide to stay married or not. Actually, kind of joking when I first started this thing, and I was thinking about how marriage is not about romance. One of the things I thought about saying, but it might make Lisa mad, was, often it's just about true grit, right? Some days I don't know how she stays with me. I can be really difficult. So our vows were that, and we chose 7 hand fastings. So you cross your arms, and with each thing that you promise, you're bound with a cord. And so our 7 things were all like that. They were very practical sort of stuff. And yeah, because we were thinking like feminists. There are videos. No, I'm kidding. Home movie time. No. Oh, what was really cute, though, I do have to share this. When we did our legal wedding in Massachusetts, we had this lovely judge. She was fantastic. And I called the courthouse ahead of time because we literally drove to Cape Cod. We were there, 4 days, and then 24-hour drive home. So, and you have to go before the judge and explain to them why you need to hurry this along. To begin with, we were going to say, well, I'm pregnant, but we didn't. So anyway, but the judge was so delightful, and she had never done hand fasting. Well, we wanted to kind of loosely repeat the ceremony we'd had before. Again, we didn't want any of this binary stuff rooted in patriarchy. And so she was so cute, and when she did the knot, and she said, I've been practicing. I researched how to do this. And it was just she was just very adorable. We loved her tremendously. The judge was kind of amusing, too, when we had to go explain to him while we were hurrying this.
Anybody else? We've got refreshments downstairs so we can continue the conversation downstairs.
Thank you. Thank you again for coming.